Starting off with the weapons, I went for the Bloody Glory in my main hand. It's got the highest amount of bleed buildup out of any of the weapons, coming in at 300. Now, to really maximize the bleed on it, I tossed on another Bloody Glory so that when I swing them, I'm now building up 600 bleed per attack. If you can't get a second Bloody Glory, using the Luminous Abiding Defender sword in your offhand is the next best thing. Bleed just does extra damage and makes whoever I'm hitting take increased physical damage after it procs. So with two swords having a total of 600 bleed buildup, I can proc a blood loss every 1 to 2 hits consistently. Unfortunately, these weapons do a lot more holy damage than physical, so I'm not able to get the fullest potential out of the bleed status effect. Still, the additional damage it provides after each proc makes up for that. To get the Bloody Glory, you're going to start the Pilgrim's Perch Vestige and follow exactly where I'm going. There's no one you have to kill here to be rewarded it. Running by and grabbing it and getting out of there as quick as possible is an option. And to get the Luminous Abiding Defender sword, you can either get it after killing the Abiding Defender bosses in the Mans of the Hollowed Brothers, or you can farm it off of the Abiding Defenders in the Empyrean area right before you would fight Judge Cleric. Continuing on, when it comes to the runes, you'll want to place 2 Saddest runes in the Radiance sockets. Each one is going to increase the weapon's holy damage, and for the last socket, I placed the Vixie's rune that increases the rate of bleed buildup. In short, it allows me to proc bleed buildups with less hits. If you were able to get a second Bloody Glory, the rune setup is almost the exact same, with the only difference being replacing one of the Saddest runes for the Crafter's Essence rune. The Crafter's Essence rune lowers the weapon's weight down to 0, making it possible to fast roll without dumping a ton of points into endurance. And if you're using the Luminous Abiding Defender sword, the Crafter's Essence rune also lowers the weapon's requirements down to 0, so now you wouldn't have to invest so many points into strength just to use it. The other runes for it aren't going to be as helpful, but grabbing anything that'll increase the weapon's physical damage in the strength slot, and the Balago rune in the Inferno slot to reduce an enemy's armor after hitting them. And to get the Vixie's rune, you'll have to kill the Crimson Rector that can be found in the Mans of the Hollowed Brothers or wherever you come across one. You'll have to soulflay them and beat them down to the point where you can execute them. They'll drop the rune right away, and I found that by doing this method, it guarantees that they'll drop it. You're gonna have to do the same method again to get the Saddest rune, except you have to do it on the Sin Piercer Archer. You can find them in multiple areas of the game, but the one I got is located close to the Abbey of the Hollowed Sisters Vestige. Lastly, for the Crafter's Essence rune, you have to first retrieve one of the stone tablets found in a chest in the Tower of Penance. After that, bring it to the blacksmith at the Skyrest and she'll reward you with the Crafter's Essence rune and the ability to socket runes. Now the best way to use these swords is by doing a heavy attack first and then following up with a light attack. If you do 2 heavy attacks, 2 light attacks, or a light attack into a heavy attack, it takes a lot more time to swing the weapons. This way just maximizes your DPS. And to increase it even further, I apply the buff Lacerating Weapon to increase its bleed buildup and add some extra damage. This just ensures that every 1 to 2 hits will proc a bleed buildup. You could also use the spell Radiant Weapon to add extra holy damage to the sword due to it already having a lot of bleed buildup by itself. Now when it comes to the other spells, I use Piercing Light as my basic ranged attack. It's good enough to take out any archers or mages that are far away, or even thinning out a large group of people. With its low mana cost and decent damage, it makes it perfect for a ranged poking attack. And the last spell I use is more optional, but it does go really well with this setup, and that's Lucent Beam. You shoot out a constant beam of holy damage, draining your mana for every second you're holding it. The spell can melt bosses very quickly, but also depletes your mana bar just as fast, so it's best to use this after you've already buffed your weapon, since there's not going to be any mana left afterwards. Lastly, in regards to the spells, I'm using the Abyss Chalice for my Catalyst. It's the second best one you can grab, but if you want the very best, you're going to want to grab the Exactor's Scripture. This one has an S scaling at max level, while the Abyss Chalice has an A+ for scaling. The power difference in the end is not that huge, so using either one will do just fine. Not to mention, this build isn't really focused around spells, more so for buffing the weapon. And to get these spells, you can find Lacerating Weapon in the room after you defeat the Raptionist Hunter of the Dusk in the Abbey of the Hollowed Sisters area. Basically, just progress through the game as you would and you'll stumble across it. The same can be said with the spell Piercing Light. Start at the vestige of the Pale Butcher and cross the wooden bridge. You'll find the spell on the ground right in front of a statue. Be cautious though, cause there are multiple enemies here that will jump you. Next, if you want to grab the spell Loosen Beam, you're gonna have to complete some of Exactor Dunmire's questline to be able to buy it from his shop. Again, the spell is optional and not needed for this setup. Lastly, for the Abyss Chalice, it's rewarded after defeating the Abyss boss that's located right before you get the vestige of Rosamund, or the Abbey of the Hollowed Sisters. Either way, spells aren't the only way we increase the damage of our swords. The rings and pendant we use can boost them by a lot as well. When it comes to the pendant, the best one to grab is the Empyrean Pendant. It increases all holy damage and fire defense by around 12%. This affects the spells too, since they only deal holy damage. Then for the rings, I was unfortunate enough to miss out on the two that I wanted, and those are the Grayson Ring that deals around an extra 10% damage when dual wielding weapons, and Orion Sorcerer's Ring that increases all holy damage by 10%, also affecting the spells again. In my situation, I equipped 2 Barrage Root Rings to increase my spell damage by 40%. I didn't have any other backup choices for these, but even without those 2 rings, the swords can still shred through bosses and large guys easily. Now to get the rings and pendant, you'll have to progress through Exactor Dunmire's questline in order to get the Empyrean Pendant, the same way you get the spell Loosen Beam. You can get a nice little 2-in-1 here. For the Orion Sorcerer's Ring, you'll have to give the Tattered Banner to Stormhound, which can both be found in the Abbey of the Hollowed Sisters area. After giving it to him, it'll expand his shop and you'll be able to buy it. And for the Grayson Ring, you'll have to progress through Damarose the Marked's questline to buy it from her. This one will take a bit of work to get, so I'd recommend watching a full in-depth guide to her questline. There's still one more thing to this build that allows you to do thousands of damage without getting hit back, and that's the Umbral Eyes that we use. In the primary slot, I have the Eye of Lorello the Cursed Knight that increases the Soulflay stun duration, and in the secondary slots, I have the Umbral Eye of Olerin and the Pale Butcher. They allow me to do 50% more damage to Soulflayed enemies. Each one gives a 25% boost, so if you only have one of them equipped, it's still gonna help out a lot. As you can guess, you're gonna Soulflay any boss or strong enemy and just start beating on them. If you do the combo I mentioned before of doing a heavy attack into a light attack and then repeating that, you can get off 3 to 4 hits before the stun ends. I've been able to get more than 6,000 damage with a single Soulflay charge, and that's all free damage with no one dodging or hitting you back whatsoever. And to get the Umbral Eyes, you can find the Eye of Lorello the Cursed Knight right before you'd pick up the Bloody Glory weapon. After crossing the bridge, instead of going back inside to get the weapon, keep going straight and you'll find an Umbral statue that you can Soulflay and it'll drop it for you. For the Eyes of the Pale Butcher, you'll start at the vestige of Valid and make your way towards the Hushed Saint boss. Just follow where I'm going, and at the end of it, you'll have to Soulflay one of the undead statues to get the eye. And for the Eye of Olerin, you can also get this from the Tower of Penance by Soulflaying one of the undead statues to pick it up. It's going to be on the opposite side from where you get the stone tablet earlier on for the Crafter's Essence rune. The only thing left in this build to go over are the stats, so let's take a look at them. The bare minimum needed to use everything in this build is 20 strength and 32 radiance. After getting the bare minimum, you'll level up radiance to 75 max, cause beyond that point, you don't get much more damage out of it. You'll also want to put a decent amount of levels into vitality since this is a melee focused build, meaning you're going to be up close for majority of the time. Endurance is not something you need to level up unless you want to wear some heavier armor for better protection or a nicer aesthetic. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to check out my other build guides, and thanks for watching.